Hello, my name is John McNamara, and today I'd like to talk about the story of Abram in chapters 13 and 14 of the book of Genesis. In chapter 13, we see Abram with his nephew Lot. And as they are together, this is when Abram has come back from Egypt with Sarai and the family, they look around the land and they notice that there's a problem. And the problem is that they both have a lot of flocks. And the flocks need a lot of land to graze and they need a lot of water. And unfortunately, what's happening is they really don't have enough land. So they kind of discuss it among themselves and they're thinking about it. And they say, well, probably the best thing is if we separate. So Abram is kind of a very generous guy, and even though he's older and Lot's his nephew, his brother had passed away, unfortunately, and Lot was left without a father. So Abram, in some ways, sort of adopts him. And he could have chosen the best land for himself. But instead, he said to Lot, Lot, why don't you pick the land that you want, and then I'll take somewhere else. So Lot looks over everything, and he looks at the land, and he says, wow, look at that land over there by the Jordan Plain. There's a lot of water over there. And that looks really, really good. That looks like good land. I think, you know what I'll do? I think I'll take that land. Abram says, fine, go ahead. So he takes that land and he goes with his flocks and all of his men who were his servants and helpers, quite a huge number. And he settles on the land in the plains of Jordan, which is a great land, very prosperous land, and right near a city that was very prosperous called Sodom. And it was really, really a good place for him to be. And his flocks had plenty of water, so things were looking good. So Abram journeys, and he comes to a different spot. He's looking around, and he kind of looks near this town called Hebron, and he sees it's pretty wonderful too, and he settles there. But you notice that the first thing that he does when he settles there is he builds an altar and he gives thanks to God. We see in Abram a lot of prayerfulness, always going to God and giving thanks to God for the many blessings that God has shared with him. So the Lord, when he was there, made a promise. It was a similar promise that he had made earlier to Abram, and he said, as many as the sands in this earth, you could count them. That's how many your descendants would be. And Abram, at this point, has no children. He's getting older. He's wondering exactly what this means, but he kind of trusts in God. He knows that God will sort of take care of him. So he says thank you to God for that wonderful promise that God makes to him. Sort of an agreement with Abram that you'll have many, many descendants. But then there's some bad news. Lot, unfortunately, gets involved in this battle with these different kings that kind of fighting against one another. Lot gets caught up in it. He's in Sodom. The king of Sodom is involved in the battle, and he gets captured. So Abram's like, as soon as he hears that news, what am I going to do? My nephew's captured. I have to do something. So he decides to get all of his men together and calls them together and says, Lot's been captured. Let's go see if we can help him out. So they go, and very cagily, Abram goes at night when all of the captors who had taken care of Lot and captured him were sleeping. And he has the battle, and he wins the battle. He's able to rescue Lot. And he brings Lot back. And after he brings Lot back, there's a kind of time when the king of Sodom comes and some of the others who were involved in the battle, and they come to give thanks. And one of those who kind of leads them into thanks for this victory that he had won is the king of Salem, Melchizedek. Now, Salem is considered to be the present-day Jerusalem. It's kind of a little bit uncertain in the Hebrew whether he was actually the king of Salem or if he was just a king who was associated with them, because the Hebrew word is kind of similar there. But as this king, he's not just a king, he's kind of a priest and a leader in prayer. So he brings an offering of bread and wine, similar to our Eucharist. He offers the bread and wine in thanksgiving to God, the Lord, for this victory. And he says that Abram will be especially blessed by God. And Abram is very impressed with his prayerfulness and impressed with the promise he makes. And so he gives him a tenth of all of his possessions as his way of saying thanks for the prayer and thanks to God. And this practice now of giving a tenth is what we call tithing. It has become kind of a religious practice to kind of give back to God as a sign of our thanksgiving to God. Abram also kind of refused to take some of the spoils of the victory. In those days, when you had won a victory, you were entitled to a lot of the spoils from that victory, a lot of the possessions that you seized. You could kind of take on your own. It was the custom of the time to do that. And the king of Sodom said, well, how are we going to split this up? Abram said, don't worry about it. I have plenty. You want it, you take it. You can have that. Just some of the men who helped me, well, if you could give them some as well. But for myself, fine. I don't want anything. Some of the characteristics now that we see about Abram here is that he's the type of person who puts others first. He doesn't so much think of himself. Even with Lot, the way the land was divided, he said, Lot, you do it first. The king of Sodom, he says, no, I don't need any of that. Even with Melchizedek, we gave him a tenth of everything in tithing. Always kind of putting others first and putting God first in doing that. And then going to rescue Lot. Again, putting his own life at risk to help his nephew, but putting the safety and the health and security of his nephew first before his own. Also, we see that he's not so much interested in material possessions. He didn't wage war to get a lot of possessions. He was happy with what the Lord had given him and blessed him with. He wasn't seeking to have, so much wealth. He just wanted to thank God for what God had given to him. Another thing that we see is his prayerfulness. As he comes back from Egypt, he sets up an altar and prays. After the victory, there is prayer. We see prayer as an important part of Abram's life. And the final thing that we see in these chapters in the book of Genesis about Abram is we see that Abram really always tries to put God first. And so we celebrate Abram as our first one who said yes to following God. So Father Abraham had many friends. Many friends had Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so were you. So let's all praise the Lord. Keep on praising the Lord.